Hamas has wounded us. They are responsible for all the destruction. All the destruction is on them. May God settle the score with Hamas, take revenge on Hamas. They destroyed our lives. These are the words of Palestinians in Gaza, leaving Jabalia a couple of weeks ago, interviewed by Israeli journalist Ohad Chemo from Channel 12. These are the voices that Hamas and the members of the proposition don't want you to hear. These are the voices they want you to silence. We want you to rule, they say. We don't want Hamas. They took away the humanitarian aid. We will be killed if we say anything. The Jews bring us food, give us humanitarian corridor. May God take revenge on those who uprooted and killed us. Hamas. All of the falsehoods we have heard from the proposition this evening, their support for terror, the strengthening, essentially, of the oppressors, not just Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Houthis, other Iranian proxies in Iraq and in Syria. They oppress Palestinians and Israelis alike. Now, this disgraceful motion and the pretty shameful manner in which it has been handled this evening discredits this once illustrious institution. And that Jewish students have also felt intimidated from attending tonight is an extremely sad state of affairs. But I think anyone watching this debate will probably understand why. This is a dark moment in the Oxford Union's history, and as a member of this institution and a committed attendee in my time at this university, I think it is a very sad day on that front too. Now, those who cannot argue their case flee like cowards, like Norman Finkelstein, who pulled out at the last moment and in fact now seems to be scheduled to speak tomorrow unopposed, or like Mohammed al-Kurd, who also, like a coward, left after his speech because he could not face the truth that you have heard from the opposition benches. This debate has been predicated on a slew of falsehoods and misinformation. And in answer to the lady's point from the floor, red lines have been crossed this evening. I don't just refer to support for terrorism and to law enforcement watching. I do highlight Section 12(1)(a) of the Terrorism Act 2000. Calling the 7th of October a heroic act is something that is and ought to be recognized as unlawful in this country. But we've also heard made-up facts, made-up allegations, made-up quotes. No, Ben-Gurion did not say that he wanted to expel the Arabs. He said that attackers would be removed. He called on the Arabs to join the Jews in building the state of Israel. And his quote was, "We do not want to expel the Arabs. We do not have to expel the Arabs." The Israeli Arab who was ejected from this chamber in a pretty shameful development and an exhibition of double standards, which unfortunately Israelis, both Jewish and Arab, have come to acknowledge and expect. He is proof of the 20% of Israel's population that are the only free Arabs in the Middle East, that live with full citizen rights, and that put the lie to everything that you have heard from the opposition this evening. I dream, in fact, of a day when people stop making up those falsehoods, those allegations, those lies, when people stop making up those quotes, because even Benny Morris acknowledged he was mistaken when he reported it. And a little bit of research, ladies and gentlemen, which is something this university is so good, I think, at instilling in its students, would have assisted the opposition substantially in this debate. We heard the essence, essentially, of the advice, the optimism from the opposition, from the proposition benches. The Israelis, what should they do? They should live in Palestine and under Palestinian rule. We saw the result of two reservists losing their way and finding themselves in Ramallah in the year 2000. When they went to a local police station for help, they were lynched. Their livers were eaten. And that image of one of their attackers holding up his bloodied hands to the window towards the baying crowd below, that image of the red hand has been a central part of the propaganda initiative so that Hollywood members have been wearing red badges and celebrating the slaughter of Jews and urging it to continue. This is not a chicken and an egg scenario. This is not a situation, and we've heard so many examples from the proposition so far. Israel has done X, Y, Z, which have never been shown or been substantiated. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 followed massacres of Jews. The Hebron massacre in 1929. In fact, Arabs have been massacring Jews in the Middle East for centuries. This is not a chicken and an egg scenario. But we have been asked for historical and we've been asked specifically for historical context, and what I'm going to provide to you is something that hasn't come up, which is extraordinary in the context of a discussion of two legal terms, genocide, apartheid. The lack of historical context and the lack of legal context has been palpable. But I am here, so fear not, ladies and gentlemen. Apartheid. Apartheid and genocide. Well, like colonialism, ethnic cleansing, occupation, all of the other blood libels that we've heard from the proposition benches this evening, the insidious nature of these allegations is that they take the victims of a crime and they accuse those victims of committing the very crime that was imposed on them. Apartheid is a prime example. Where is there apartheid in this region, ladies and gentlemen? If we just look at the area from the river to the sea, the West Bank, Palestinian-controlled territory, and yes, the Palestinians have self-governance. They have an autonomy after the Oslo Accords established in areas A and B, where that self-governance has meant that part of the world is Jew-free, Judenrein. You've heard that word before somewhere. Jew-free also, as in Gaza, since Israel's withdrawal in 2005. Every Jew was ripped from their homes, even the dead ones were dug up so that they could not be desecrated when that territory was handed over to Palestinian self-governance. There is apartheid, ladies and gentlemen. Herein is another perfect example of complete nonsense that seems to be opium for the masses. Gaza has a border with Egypt, and it is somewhere, unlike everyone who has spoken in this debate, I actually went to in September on the ground in Gaza and inspecting the tunnels that exist under the border between Gaza and the Egyptians. One of them was big enough to drive military-grade vehicles through. There was soot on the walls because of the vehicles that had come backwards and forwards, resupplying Hamas with Iranian military might right under an Egyptian command tower. So I invite anyone who is taken in by this nonsense simply to look at a map. Apartheid, you have heard debunked by those that have grown up in Israel and experienced it, the opportunities that Israeli Arabs have. The lie is perpetrated by infantilizing the Palestinians and ignoring the self-governance that exists in Gaza, in the West Bank, and organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch lie about what the position is. They conflate Israeli Arabs, such as the gentleman who was ejected from this chamber. They conflate Israeli Arabs with those who have self-determination under the autonomy of the Palestinian Authority. But then we come to this obscene allegation of genocide. And yes, the term coined by the Jewish jurist Raphael Lemkin in the aftermath of the Holocaust to provide a legal terminology to the Jewish experience of being targeted because they were Jews for extermination. And when the proposition referred to the definition, they left out two very critical words: as such. This is to do with intentionally targeting a group as such, because of the group that they belong to. That was the Jewish experience in the Holocaust. It was also the experience of Jews on the 7th of October, when those acts that delusional third speaker referred to as heroic deliberately targeted Jews because they were Jews for rape, slaughter, torture, mutilation, and kidnap. If they cannot acknowledge that, they have much bigger problems than the ones that they profess to you this evening. Genocide is a slur being alleged against the real victims of genocide in this case, because it is providing a legal hook.
The speaker will be heard.
A legal hook. I'm glad actually that there is an opportunity for someone to be heard that can speak about what the ICJ actually found so far in the genocide case. Because unlike the speakers who have been invited this term, including Husam Zumlot, who repeatedly lies about what was found by the International Court of Justice in their provisional measures order, and unfortunately he wasn't challenged when he was here as a guest earlier this term, the ICJ has not found that there is plausible genocide or a risk of plausible genocide or anything of the sort. And I honestly thought that after Joan Donoghue, the former president of the ICJ, went on Hard Talk on the BBC to correct this falsehood, it would stop being repeated, but clearly not in institutions like the Oxford Union. Genocide is simply the latest version of the blood libel that is being propagated against Jews because they are Jews. And it is a blood libel not because it is targeting Jews, but because it is false. It is the falsehoods that have been coming out of the proposition benches this evening that are nothing new, because unfortunately, the oldest hatred, the hatred of the Jews, goes hand in hand with lies about them. Then we had this notion of colonialism. When one considers who the indigenous people in that territory are, Jews, indigenous to Judea, the notion that Israel is a colonial entity is laughable. One only needs to look at the archaeology. One of the major focuses, though, of this allegation of genocide is the falsehoods that we've heard about the last 13 months of Israel's campaign against Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist groups in Gaza. And when I was there, I also witnessed the challenges that the IDF was dealing with. Civilian houses booby-trapped in order to try and kill as many IDF soldiers as possible as they sweep through these areas seeking to evacuate civilians and target the Hamas who embed themselves in them. The notion that even the use of human shields that Hamas is proud of was disputed this evening starts to reveal the ridiculous position that the proposition have adopted. But there are root causes here, very important root causes that actually go hand in hand with all of the falsehoods that we have heard. It is either being put to you from a position of ignorance, or there is something far more malicious behind the falsehoods that have been repeated, emphasized, embellished even over the course of this evening. Indoctrination is at the core of the perpetuation of this conflict. When Palestinian kids are taught from kindergarten up that the highest calling in life is to slaughter as many Jews as possible and become a martyr, peace is being pushed further and further away. What nonsense? 3/4 of the terrorists who crossed the border on the 7th of October were educated in UNRWA-run schools. It is a matter of public record what the Palestinian Authority approved curriculum teaches in these UNRWA-run schools. And in fact, when I was on Trigonometry, the podcast, only a few months ago, they had the great initiative of playing some of Palestinian children's TV programs as part of that interview. This is material that many people, especially in this country, have never been exposed to. I encourage you to view it, because it will tell you everything that you need to know about the bloodlust and the terrorism and the indoctrination that is going to push this conflict on for decades more unless it is grappled with and unless the international community's complicity in it is likewise grappled with. But it is not just the indoctrination, but also the incentivization to terror. Forgive me, I'm going to take the same amount of time as those on the opposition benches. That means I've got another 5 minutes. we have heard very little this evening about the Palestinian Authority Pay for Slay program, which encourages terrorism by rewarding terrorists according to how many Jews they have slaughtered, the severity of their sentence, their time in Israeli prisons. And this is directly linked to the 7th of October, because Ali Kadi and the others who spent 2 years organizing those attacks, there was nothing heroic about it, were paid salaries by the Palestinian Authority while they were organizing those barbarous medieval-style atrocities. The so-called moderates in this equation, really? They're also incentivizing the continuation of that genocidal war against the Jews. Now, one of the massive areas of misinformation this evening has been the issue of aid being provided by Israel into the Gaza Strip, being facilitated. I checked the COGAT website over the course of this debate. I had quite a lot of time on my hands, ladies and gentlemen. 1,149,932 tons of aid. That's 58,101 trucks. 1% of the international aid, the trucks that the international community has attempted to send into Gaza, Israel has stopped for security reasons. And the calorie count is significant because over 3,000 calories a day have been going into the Gaza Strip per individual there. Why? Why do we not hear criticism calling out of the causes of Palestinian suffering? The quotes that I read out to you at the very beginning of my speech were against Hamas. But it's not just Hamas that has contributed to this. Where is the condemnation of Egypt? Where are the calls for Egypt to comply with its international law obligations? Those that it signed up to in the African Union Convention on Refugees, that it acceded to in 1980, to open the border and allow the passage of civilians fleeing civil disorder in Gaza. Those are its international law obligations. I haven't heard anything from the proposition on that this evening, which is why I agree with the rest of my speakers. They don't care about the Palestinians. Their focus is on the eradication of the state of Israel, and they are peddling in blood libels to seek to achieve it. We had the speaker who left the debate, I mean, in and of itself, a rather shameful disregard for the tradition of the Oxford Union, referenced, in fact, his own case of Sheikh Jarrah, a property that was purchased in 1875 by 2 rabbis and put into family trust, that was then seized by Jordan when it ethnically cleansed the Jews of East Jerusalem and occupied that territory in 1948. That property that Mohammed al-Kurd was referring to came into the hands of the Jordanian custodian of enemy property. And instead of transferring the ownership of that property, which would have later even been respected, albeit being unlawful, forgive me, but the other speakers had quite a deal longer. I've been keeping time, 20 minutes on the last count. So that Jordanian custodian of enemy property issued a couple of leases over it. Now, leases require rent and they require compliance with the conditions. Neither of those have been forthcoming from the first speaker from the opposition and his cohabitants, illegal squatters who have been given time after time, in fact, 50 years of litigation by the courts in Israel, an opportunity to get their house in order. But of course, they have no regard to the law. They have no regard to the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have seen on display this evening is a continuation and a perpetuation of the falsehoods against Israel in order to draw you into those falsehoods. There have been references to useful idiots this evening in response to some of the comments from the floor. I do not believe that you are useful idiots. You would not be at this institution if you were.
Could the secretary give the speaker 1 more minute the same way Ms. Susan had?
Well, I was going to go to the end of the time of the previous speaker because I stick to rules and precedent. let's not be under any illusions here. We all know what this audience is, where your allegiances lie. You've made that very plain this evening. We all know what the outcome of this vote is going to be. That is not important. What is important is that ultimately the truth will out. What is important is that all of those Jewish students who were too intimidated to come tonight will have an opportunity to come not only to hear the truth in future, but in future to speak the truth. And that will be occasioned because brave members of the opposition benches this evening have called out the falsehoods, have called out the lies in the face of opposition, even from the union authorities in organizing this debate. The shame of this evening, I hope, will be overcome because in future years, there will be debates where the rules, procedure, and decorum are respected. And there will be debates when it is not just the speakers here on the opposition that are calling out these falsehoods and that are seeking a peace and a future built on real history, real law, real facts. Thank you.